You are listening to Preconceived, where we examine the preconceptions that shape how we view the world and the paradigms by which we live our lives.
Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick, and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. One's perception in society is shaped by many things, but perhaps more than anything, our first impression of someone is most influenced by the way they look. Before someone even opens their mouth, the reality is that we often judge people by how beautiful they are. But what exactly is beauty? Has beauty changed over the years? Many would argue that beauty has become synonymous with a youthful appearance. Basically, not looking older with wrinkly skin. How has this phenomenon developed? What has the beauty industry's role been in promoting this notion of beauty equaling youth? What misconceptions, if any, have been spread in society to perpetuate this notion that beauty must look a certain way? And how has this been harmful? I am joined today by Jessica DeFino. Jessica is a pro-skin anti-product beauty reporter dismantling beauty standards, debunking marketing myths, and exploring how beauty culture impacts people, physically, psychologically, and psychospiritually. Her work, as HuffPost once put it, basically gives the middle finger to the entire beauty industry. Her articles have been published in the New York Times, Vogue, WWD, Teen Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Allure, New York Magazine's The Cut, Elle, Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, Glamour, Self, Couture, Man Repelé, Hello Giggles, Business Insider, The Zoe Report, Fashionista.com, and more. As you can see, she is extremely well published and well regarded in the beauty industry. So I'm delighted to have Jessica joining the podcast today. All right, Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. So I just read off a list of over 10 very impressive publications where you've written. How did you get involved in this beauty industry?
It all started with the Kardashians. I guess my first foray into the beauty industry was when I was working as an editor on the official Kardashian-Jenner apps in 2015. And then through a series of mishaps during that job, like one, it was a very high stress environment. And two, for the first time in my career, beauty PR brands were sending me free products to test for coverage on the app. So the combination of stress and so many products caused a lot of skin issues for me. And in the process of understanding those skin issues and healing those skin issues, I became sort of fascinated and obsessed with the beauty industry and decided to pivot my career into beauty.
So it really developed from this personal experience that you had with these beauty products, which we'll talk about, that are touted as these are going to be great for you, and some negative experiences that you had with them.
Exactly. And beyond my personal experience, when I started trying to figure out what was happening to me, I had uncovered all of this research about the, biological functioning of the skin and the role of products and how all of these things collide and intersect that went so far beyond my personal experience. And I had been somewhat of a beauty obsessive growing up. I read every beauty magazine. I had been going to a dermatologist since I was 13. And I was like, why have I never heard this basic information before? Seems strange that the basic functioning of the skin is not covered in the industry. So yeah, it definitely started with my own experience. And then I was like, there's so much more here to dive into.
And you've written about so many interesting topics. Your articles are fascinating. I haven't read all of them because there's so many, but
there's too many.
I read this in the introduction, and it says this on your website, that HuffPost once put it as, your work basically gives the middle finger to the entire beauty industry, which is amazing. One of the preconceptions your work kind of tries to shatter is this notion that finding certain physical features beautiful is a matter of biology and instinct rather than society and cultural conditions. What do you mean by that in terms of our definition of beauty and how that's changed, or I don't know if it's changed, but how that's manifested in society?
Yeah, so I think that there is this sort of preconceived notion that the things that we find attractive or the physical features that we find admirable and we want for ourselves and we admire in others are sort of this function of instinct or biological longing, that they are just human nature. And that's just not true. I mean, the standard of beauty changes from culture to culture. It changes from era to era. So in seeing those changes, we can see that this is not a hardwired biological yearning for a specific type of beauty, but rather a socially conditioned idea of what is considered beautiful or what is considered attractive. And I think it's really easy to see when you look at today's standard of beauty, which pretty much does not exist in nature. You know, a lot of it is based on filters, on surgeries, on grafting features that don't really exist in the natural world onto our bodies through plastic surgery or aesthetic procedures or Facetune or Photoshop. So like there's no reason biologically or anthropologically why we would be programmed to want that from human instinct.
That's a really interesting point, because human instinct implies natural.
Exactly.
And all the things you're mentioning are not natural.
Exactly.
Is this a newer phenomenon over the last few decades, or has this been something that's been brewing for a lot longer than that? This
No,
new notion of beauty.
I think that it's something that has existed almost forever. Like as long as humans have been hungry for power and go about getting that power in destructive ways, beauty has sort of been part of that. Beauty is just another form of capital, especially for women existing under patriarchy. Beauty has been a way to claim some power for yourself within this sort of oppressive system. So it's been going on for a very long time. I definitely think a lot of modern problems were invented and accelerated like around the Industrial Revolution, when suddenly this standard of beauty could be, first of all, standardized and then industrialized and shipped out to people across the world, across the country. And that's just not how beauty is supposed to function. It's not a homogenous thing, and it's not even a physical thing.
And how did that take shape in the Industrial Revolution? Just that it became certain products that were being able to be shipped?
Exactly. Just the availability of the products, their novelty was exciting, and suddenly, marketing started for all of these products. And to get more people to buy more products, you had to establish this baseline lie, basically, that everyone needed these products and you needed to look a certain way and you should look a certain way. And in fact, looking this one certain way is beautiful and it's healthy and it's good. And so everybody now wants to buy these products where, before, when they weren't available, no one was like suffering for lack of lipstick or, facial oil.
Now, beauty, as you identified, has obviously been around basically since mankind, or humankind, I will say, has been around. This notion of it, like you said, social capital, and it's the first thing somebody notices about you. But beauty's become synonymous in our current era, I guess, with youthfulness. Is that a newer thing, or has that always kind of been what beauty's been considered if we look at different eras in time?
I don't think that it's always been what has been considered beauty, but there are a lot of factors throughout history that have created that ideal and compounded it and made it seem almost inseparable from beauty. So for instance, there's a lot of religious indoctrination there. So youth was sort of seen as this state of innocence in religious communities, specifically Christianity and Catholicism. And as we see that spread from Europe throughout the world, through colonialism, we see this youth as innocence, as beauty, really start to take hold of a large group of people. Youth as beauty also stems from productivity mindset, which stems from slavery. So the more productive you are, the more valuable you are. And obviously, as you get older, you just naturally become less physically able to do that hard work. And so youth is really desirable. And that becomes a beauty trait. We can see youth becoming a beauty ideal through just like how we treat the elderly population, especially in the West, they're sort of like discarded. They're not respected as elders. And so that creates, again, another reason to want to look youthful or perform this youthfulness. And then there's also some like colonizer mindset going on there because, for instance, Black skin, Asian skin, skin of color has more inherent protective measures. So it resists a lot of the aging process that comes from exposure to the environment. And so we see fewer signs of aging. And that became a desirable trait that suddenly white people were like, we want that too, and started creating this whole industry to sort of mimic what was happening with these other races. And then I think just like in terms of universal humanity, our fear of death, just not knowing how to deal with that. We do not live in a culture that knows how to deal with mortality and death. And so this constant fight to look young is sort of a way to ignore our mortality.
One of the things that strikes me is it's such a self-perpetuating problem, right? Because on the one hand, society, we are society, but society at large, with many factors and powerful people in it, has kind of decided the status quo is, yeah, younger is more productive, even if that's not true. So for people who do end up using a lot of beauty products, getting a lot of work done, as they call it, it's tough because they're trying to say, even if they know internally, I'm getting older, but I know I'm just as productive. I know that beauty is a superficial thing. The world is going to look at them in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are walking around with more wrinkles and looking older and all that, as much as they could say, I want to fight back and I am not defined by beauty equals youth, it's tough to progress in the world if everybody else is looking at you and saying, oh, but you do look older, so I kind of want the younger thing.
Yeah, I think there are two sort of important things to note there. The first is that, yeah, that's what happens. Engaging in all of these anti-aging beauty behaviors is, I think, a trauma response to being told that your value, human being, is in the way you look, and that the value in the way you look is in looking young. And so when we engage in these beauty behaviors, it's really a coping mechanism, a way to cope with the culture around us. And abandoning those coping mechanisms is, one, really hard, and two, not always healthy, because you're using them to cope with something. If you don't have an alternative coping mechanism set up for yourself and you just abandon all of these beauty behaviors, what are you going to do? You're suddenly hit with the harsh reality of the culture that you're living within and how you measure up and how people are seeing you. And so it does require a lot of internal work, self-care, but also we have to acknowledge that this is a societal and a cultural problem, and it has to be collectively addressed. Community care has to be part of it. Social action has to be part of it. Collective change has to be part of it. So that's important to note. But also, my challenge to that notion is, does getting a facelift or getting Botox materially change the circumstances of your life when you are older and you're trying to look younger? I think actresses in Hollywood are a great example, because we look at them and we see them getting this work done and we say, okay, roles disappear for women after a certain age. So of course these women would want to look younger. But these tools, these surgeries, these injectables have been available for decades now, and the problem hasn't necessarily changed. Engaging in these behaviors is not changing society in any material way. It's not that an actress hits 40, doesn't get a role, and then she gets a facelift and all of a sudden she's getting these roles. I think we really have to check ourselves and challenge the idea that participating individually in these beauty systems is doing anything at all.
That's a really good point. Is it, though, perhaps that, like, you look at Jennifer Aniston, you look at Nicole Kidman, and I'm picking on people completely unfairly. I have no idea who's gotten what work done. It's not important, but I imagine they've gotten some work done. A lot of actresses have gotten work done. Is it that, sure, maybe there was never really a drop-off for them, like you're referring to? It's not the situation where Jennifer Aniston was never getting work and then she had some work done and she started getting work again. She's kind of always had work. Is that because she's subscribed to the beauty industry for so long gradually? Because I think she's 50. Nicole Kidman's in her 50s, I believe. And these women are actually still getting roles. But then I wonder if they hadn't had some of that work done, I don't know if they'd be landing some of these main roles, or maybe it's a good thing that things are changing in society. But I often feel bad when I look at some of these actresses in Hollywood, because it's easy, especially for guys, to look at it and say, realistically, a lot of guys will judge. A lot of people will judge women too and say they don't look great, or they'll say they look like they've had a lot of work done. but it's kind of a lose-lose, because if they didn't have the work done, they might not get the roles. And if they had the work done, then people are commenting on it.
It is like a vicious cycle, and sort of just, it's really hard to get a grasp on. I think in terms of like Jennifer Aniston's and the Nicole Kidmans and the Reese Witherspoons, one important thing to note there that is happening is that these older women are taking control on the business side of things. So a lot of them have their own production companies now, and they are producing, and they are executive producing, and they're directing, and they're creating these roles. They're working with writers to develop these films. So is it because they look young, or is it because they're creating business opportunities and thus materially changing the circumstances of the culture that they're working within that is responsible for these roles? I mean, I'm sure it could be a little bit of both. But the other thing that I have to think about in terms of actresses like that who are older and look really young, I think J-Lo is another example, Halle Berry is another example. This isn't necessarily age positivity, because these women are in their 50s and they look really young. They're glorifying youth. It's not creating the kind of change that we think it's creating to see a 55-year-old woman and say, wow, she still looks so young and sexy. Like, that's actually compounding the problem, because most women are not hitting 55 and looking like J-Lo. So like, great for J-Lo, that's an individual accomplishment. She's gamed the system, but what is there for other women to take away from that? What is there for the collective to take away from that? Pretty much nothing.
For sure.
Yeah.
I like how you emphasize there that some of these other women, especially I know Reese Witherspoon had launched her own production company, and I don't know the details of it, so you're not going to quote me, I'm sure. Don't quote me. But I know that she came up, she said, I'm not getting the roles I want to anymore, so I'm going to create my own roles. And that's extremely impressive. So by no means am I saying these women are only getting roles because of any work they may have had done. And again, I don't know what they've had done. So that's a very, very important point. I was just emphasizing that it's challenging for people as you get older in an industry that is dominated by youth to compete. I did an episode a long time ago regarding preconceptions on the Oscars, and I was so shocked by one of the facts that came out of that the majority of Best Actress winners are in their 20s. And then when you hit your 30s, it completely drops off. Whoa. And for men, rather, it's a lot easier. For men, actually, they don't really get Oscars unless they're in their 40s. This is for the Best Actor category, not supporting. But to me, that was so telling about the society we live in and the pressures that people in Hollywood face.
That's so fascinating. And I think it really speaks to women's role in Hollywood and like in the world as object, and men's role as, substance.
Totally. It's a complicated topic. I want to pivot a little bit to what initially got you involved in this industry, which is health. And a lot of the products that are advertised as beauty products are also advertised as health products. I was thinking today, knowing we're recording, what products do I have? And I mean, I don't have many products. I have a moisturizer, but I was looking at it and I was thinking, this says it's going to be great for my skin. It also says it's going to be a bit better for wrinkles. Maybe that's why I picked that particular one. I don't know. But what does the evidence show that people would be surprised about regarding a lot of the beauty products that we use that are also pretty much marketed as this is great for your skin?
Yeah, I think there has been a confluence of beauty and health, and the idea that certain features mean that you are healthy, or the idea of self-care, which under capitalism has been translated into consumerism and amassing the most products for yourself, is healthy. And those things are just false equivalencies. Like, they're not true, especially in terms of skincare, which is where I tend to focus. So the skin was fine for millennia before pre-bottled products were invented. That was only like 100 years ago. And human skin has survived for centuries, for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years, just fine without product intervention. And that's because it doesn't really need product intervention. The skin has built-in mechanisms to self-cleanse, to self-moisturize, to self-exfoliate, to self-protect, and to self-heal. And like, that's kind of where beauty brands get their ideas anyway. Like, how did the idea for these specific products come about? It's because, oh, that's what the skin needs, because the skin already does it. And very often by using more products, we interrupt these inherent functions and sort of throw them off and make the skin dependent on product intervention because its own processes have been sort of interrupted.
So can you give me an example maybe of a type of product that people use frequently where they think, okay, this is good, but actually it might be doing some damage to their skin?
I mean, almost all of them. I'll just go by broad category. So cleansers, for the most part, can be really damaging. So they tend to strip your skin of its natural oils. And oil has sort of become synonymous in the beauty industry with like dirt and grime. But that's not true. Oil is your skin's inherent moisturizer. Your skin needs that oil. So cleansers sort of strip the skin of that oil. They change its pH balance and sort of throw off the whole skin barrier's reason for being. And just that one action of cleansing your skin with something that's a little bit too harsh or a little bit too stripping can throw your skin's entire range of self-sufficient mechanisms off. And then, of course, the beauty industry uses that to sell you more products. So the next step after cleansing is toner. What does that do? It rebalances your skin's pH level because you just ruined it with cleanser. And then the next step is moisturizer, because you've just taken off your skin's inherent moisturizer with your cleanser. So all of these steps would be unnecessary if you just didn't take the first step, basically.
So let's say somebody's listening to this and saying, okay, I gotcha. So I don't actually need this stuff. But yes, like you said, skin has been around for centuries, millennia, obviously, and has been doing well, but it probably wrinkled a lot more quickly without these products. So, or sorry, go ahead. I see the hesitation. Challenge.
I would challenge that. Yeah. The excessive use of products actually ages the skin more because it wears away the skin's inherent protective and healing capabilities. So we're exposing our skin to ingredients that it doesn't want or need, and that exposure is a core part of aging. So studies actually show that about 85% of what we consider to be physical signs of aging are actually signs of exposure, not biological aging. And that exposure can come from the environment, it can come from the sun, it can come from like diet and lifestyle, also really comes from products. So even if you're using, say, 3 to 5 products per day, that can add up to hundreds of ingredients you're exposing your skin barrier to, wearing away at your skin barrier, disrupting your skin's microbiome, and leaving it more vulnerable to environmental pollution and sunlight, and aging yourself more quickly.
So, okay, so somebody who would say to you, like I just tried to say, somebody who might say to you, well, you know what, I get it, it's not good for my skin, but I'll take some of those negative disadvantages because it will make my skin look better. You're saying, well, not even necessarily. It actually might make it look worse. It might be compounding the problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have more skincare products than ever before in Western culture, and we have more skin issues than ever before in Western culture. There is a direct correlation and causation there. Like, we have sensitized our skin barriers an incredible amount, a completely unnecessary amount. Like the best feedback that I get, and I get this feedback constantly, is when someone finds my work, decides to stop using skincare, and they'll say one of two things. They'll say, I stopped using skincare and oh my God, my skin looks amazing. It looks the best it's ever looked. Or the second one I kind of love more, they say, I stopped my skincare routine and my skin looks exactly the same. Like, you're just spending all of this time and money on stuff that actually your skin's going to look the same either way. Like, the reason that we think these products make our skin look good is because we've never really given our skin a chance to see what it does without them. We start from such a young age, even with just a basic cleanser.
And in regards to some of the other physical effects, are there detriments too in terms of just like more eczema, more itchiness, irritation that we keep on using creams to help for, but that might actually be aggravated by the products?
100%. So I think the biggest example here is looking to the emerging science of the skin microbiome. I think people are much more familiar with the gut microbiome these days, but the skin has its own microbiome, which is a collection of bacteria, viruses, fungi, yeasts, parasites that all live on your skin. And it's basically like an ecosystem of little microscopic creatures on your skin. And these creatures keep your skin in balance. They produce antioxidants, which help fight pollution. Early studies have shown they produce compounds that may mitigate sun damage. They produce fatty acids, which keep your skin barrier and your oils balanced and to keep your skin moisturized. Like the microbiome is basically the original skincare routine. Like they do all of it for you. But the microbiome is really sensitive. And what a lot of our products do is disrupt this microbiome. They kill off certain bacteria. They allow other strains of bacteria to thrive. And it throws your whole skin barrier into a state of imbalance. And that can cause inflammation. Like one of the jobs of the microbiome is to produce anti-inflammatory compounds. So most skin issues stem from inflammation of some sort. And that inflammation could stem from wiping out your microbiome with products. So eczema, psoriasis, acne, and rosacea are kind of the big four inflammatory conditions. And I would say in the large majority of cases, an imbalanced microbiome has a lot to do with flare-ups of those conditions.
And there's a lot of research in medicine in general where inflammation, which we've always known is important, is really at the root cause of a lot of medical conditions. So your tie-in for inflammation there is very apt and relevant to all areas of medicine. I want to talk a little bit about Botox and fillers because I'm sure people are curious. So we've talked about the creams. We've talked about that. Some people will say, okay, well, what's wrong with Botox and fillers? And I don't want to say what's wrong, but we're being blunt. What are some of the negative consequences of Botox and fillers if I don't want to use those creams? So what are some of the physical detriments of that?
Sure. I mean, I will say that I think these procedures by and large are pretty safe. There has been some research lately that shows there may be negative physical consequences more often than has been reported. So if you're going to do it, of course, go to a trained professional, go to a dermatologist rather than an esthetician, blah, blah, blah. But the physical issues that you can run into are not the core issue that I have with injectables. The core issue that I have with injectables is that you're trying to treat a psychological issue with a physical product. You're trying to treat your aging anxiety by physically altering your skin, and that just doesn't help. There are studies that show cosmetic procedures are actually addictive. And if you crunch those numbers in the studies, the proportion of people who get injectable cosmetic procedures and become addicted and keep going back and want to change more and more and more on their body. When you compare those numbers to the percentage of people who drink alcohol versus the people who get addicted to alcohol, cosmetic procedures are by and large more addictive.
Wow.
So we think we're solving these issues that we have, but we're really just compounding the problem for ourselves, and we're compounding the problem for society. I like to think of beauty culture as a multi-level marketing company, an MLM. So it's like these standards start at the top, okay? They come from society. They come from patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, and they drift down through the tiers. They're distributed by corporations. They're distributed by the beauty industry. They trickle down to celebrities who distribute them. They trickle down to influencers who distribute them. And then they trickle down to us. And when we participate, that compounds the pressure of the people within our direct sphere of influence to participate as well. You know, it's kind of easy to look at a celebrity and say, oh man, they look amazing. I wish I could look like that. But there's some sort of level of separation where there's a reality difference where you're like, well, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not going to look like that. I'm not going to bother.
It's different than me going to a group of friends and saying, oh, wow, they all look like that. That is more relatable. That is going to make me likely to take action if I want to get these injectables.
Exactly, 100%. So we see the people around us who are our peers giving in and getting these procedures and looking, you know, in these ways that are not not natural. It's not a realistic, you know, sometimes I like to get away from the word natural, even though I use it a lot, because there's a lot of stigma there, but it's not realistic to want to look this way and to think you can look this way forever. But when we see our peers and the close people around us participating and looking like that, it really makes us want to participate. And so then when we participate, we become the conditioners too. So we're conditioned by beauty culture, and we are conditioning the people around us through beauty culture. And then that pressure again flows upward, because what are celebrities supposed to do when normal people on the street look the way that they look? The pressure is compounded for them because they're in this higher tier of celebrity and they have to do more. And so then they do more, and then we have to do more. And it's just this really unending vicious cycle. And I just truly believe that participating in beauty culture with surgeries and injectables is keeping this problem in circulation, and we need to start divesting from this industry as individuals in order to affect change in the culture.
I think that's very well said. I'm going to play devil's advocate one more time here. For the people who are listening to this who might be asking this question, they might say, okay, I agree with a lot of what you're saying philosophically, great, but I'm probably still going to do a beauty routine. They might say, you know what? I am still going to use some of my moisturizers and creams. I am still going to use that. But if it's all bad for me, if that's bad for me, if the Botox isn't great, the Botox seems to be a little more effective maybe, or fast acting. So is it such a big deal? Take aside the fact that I have to go to the doctor's office and it's labeled a procedure. Is there really such a difference? Should there be a stigma? Should I be judged to the same extent for just having this really intense moisturizing, I'm not even going to use the words, regimen, versus just getting an injection every few months?
Sure. Well, first I would say, let's take the judgment completely out of it. I don't think anyone should be judged for their behaviors, whether they participate, whether they don't. To me, it's not about judgment. It's just about honesty. Like, we can participate in these systems as long as we're honest with ourselves about why, about the motivation, and about what we're actually getting out of them. So for instance, I think it's a lot healthier to say, okay, I'm going to get Botox, but I'm going to get Botox because I am completely immobilized by the anxiety of aging that society has conditioned into me. And I don't know how to cope with that in a different way right now. And for me right now, giving into this beauty standard and sort of assuaging whatever signs of aging I can see on my face is the best way for me to cope until I figure something else out.
Yeah.
That's participating in the system, but you are honest with yourself about why. There's this author and academic, Tressie McMillan Cottom, and she has this great quote, "I like what I like is always a capitalist lie." So basically it means, like, you might want something, you might want to look a certain way, but there are so many layers to unpack about why you want that thing. And in the beauty industry, especially, when you peel back those layers, each layer, it's like an onion, and each layer is stinkier than the last. And it's just, these motivations are not healthy for us psychologically. So, like, sure, go ahead, participate, but let's start to be honest about our motivations and honest about what we actually get out of them. Maybe that one shot of Botox that you're going to need to re-up every 3 months is going to help you limit your anxiety for that 3-month period while you figure out other ways that you can sort of deal with your mortality, you know, or other ways you can get involved in maybe some social action to address ageism in different tiers of our culture and our government and our society and our institutions. To me, that's always been more fulfilling than participating in the systems and changing the way I look. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that would be my answer. I feel like I went off on a tangent and I can't remember the second part of your question.
No, we love tangents on Preconceived. That wasn't a tangent. That was a well-articulated. What strikes me, and I'm a doctor, I'm an ophthalmologist, so I shouldn't be surprised. But part of the reason we associate a lot of these products with health is because there's dermatologists and plastic surgeons who are marketing them and they're behind them. And the public's perception is, oh, if a doctor's given their A-OK on this, then obviously it's a healthy thing too. So seeing that I can sometimes look at these products and say, oh, it's dermatologists are recommending it. Great, it must be good for the skin. My question is, where does this come from? Is it a doctor-led thing? I don't think it's fully anybody, realistically, and I have a feeling that's what you're going to say. Is it companies? Who is perpetuating this notion aside from the self-perpetuating cycle we've identified?
Yeah, I think doctors are people and they're not above cultural conditioning. And when we're brought up in a culture that tells us these things, those beliefs carry over into our institutions. So saying like everything that a doctor says is healthy is kind of like saying a judge couldn't possibly be sexist because it's his job to be impartial, or a cop couldn't possibly be racist because he's supposed to protect all people. These biases are deeply, deeply embedded in all of our institutions, and healthcare is not an exception. I think a lot of the emerging research on BMI, body mass index, as a measure of health is a great example of this. So for a really long time, the BMI, the body mass index, was considered to be an indicator of your health, of your risk level for certain things. And the closer we look at some of these really old foundational studies that the entire industry has been operating off of, the entire medical system has been operating off of, we can see that that's simply not the truth. A lot of these studies were informed by cultural bias and by fat phobia and by embedded white supremacy. So I think that's just a really powerful example of how an aesthetic preference has been marketed as health through the medical system, and how we're starting to overturn that. I think dermatologists in particular are really susceptible to this aesthetic equals health mindset, because basically the goal of dermatology, as somebody who has been through every prescription you could possibly get from a dermatologist, is to erase the symptom. There is very little, if any, root cause investigation or root cause treatment. The goal of dermatology is to get rid of the surface level symptom as quickly as possible. And what we're finding out with emerging science in dermatology is that a lot of these quick aesthetic fixes are actually harmful to the skin over time. For example, antibiotics. The field of dermatology prescribes more antibiotics than almost any other field. And now we're finding out that like the bacteria on your face are so important to skin health. And the bacteria on your face,
what you were saying before about the microbiome.
Exactly. And the bacteria on your face communicate with the bacteria in your gut. And so when antibiotics for skincare wipe out the bacteria of your gut, sure, the initial reaction immediately might be clear skin because you've wiped out that acne-causing bacteria, quote unquote acne-causing bacteria, but you've also wiped out all the good bacteria that help your skin function. So long term, we see a lot of these issues come back with a vengeance. Same for things like Accutane, same for things like steroids. A lot of these are effective in the moment symptom treatments, but not actually conducive to skin health long term.
And it's tough because there's a lot of things as in science and biology that we don't know. There's a lot. I mean,
yes,
different.
Yes.
As an ophthalmologist, I'm an eye doctor. There's a lot of things we don't know. So there's a lot of times when I'll see a patient, for example, and I'll say to them, I don't really know how to get to the bottom of this. We don't know as ophthalmologists yet how to get to the bottom of this. So all I can really do is give you a Band-Aid solution. And that's okay sometimes, because sometimes the Band-Aid solution, if we give you enough Band-Aids, that's going to get you through your life. And that's
for
okay.
Sure.
But
I love that answer.
But it is really tough.
I love that answer. I think it's so important to lead with the fact that like we don't know and we will never know everything that's happening in the body. Like there's no way for the human brain to ever grasp all of what's going on inside of us ever. It's just so much and so complex. And I think just admitting that is such a beautiful place to start. But then, yeah, like you said, also acknowledging that sometimes symptom management is important as long as we're saying what it is. As long as you call it what it is, symptom management, temporary relief, especially in skin conditions where like physical pain is involved. I would never say don't go on this medication if you are physically in a lot of pain and you need some relief. And then there's also a lot to be said for like the psychological pain of not feeling beautiful when you have a condition that's flared up on your face and people are looking at you. Like, I have a lot of personal experience with that. And that is pretty much why I agreed to every prescription I've ever been on, was because I felt that pressure of looking ugly and not wanting to be seen. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about changing the culture, because we shouldn't feel that way. Like, the psychological pain of having a skin condition shouldn't be so much that we are willing to risk our long-term skin health for a temporary feeling of like looking normal or beautiful. Like, that just shouldn't ever be a factor in our healthcare.
For sure. And you come at that from a personal perspective, but also a perspective where you've done a lot of work in this. In terms of some practical advice, I'm curious if there is a type of beauty care regimen that you do endorse. Are there certain moisturizers that you say, good idea? Do you say sunscreen, good idea? Are there certain things that you say to the person listening to this? I'm not telling you just wake up and don't shower.
Right.
That's not what you're saying at all. But is there a balance that you've been able to find in order to use some of these products, maybe whether they're natural, which I know, like you said, has this weird connotation to it, or whether they're pre-bottled and they're manufactured, that you have found is a good medium?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in creating a skincare routine that is beneficial to the skin's overall health, I like to go back to that idea of like, the skin survived for so long without products, but it didn't survive for so long without care and attention. Like, human animals are animals just like any other, and we see grooming throughout the world in all of our, creatures. So like, bathing is an inherent instinctual animal human thing. Sometimes you're going to have to rinse off. In almost all cases, water works just fine. So you can splash your face with water when you feel like it needs to be cleansed. And like, literally that's enough. Like, if it's enough for like a bear, it's enough for you. You're fine. So yeah. And like, another example that I like to bring up is, have you heard of tiger grass, the ingredient tiger grass?
I've heard of it, but I don't know.
Yeah, they've like brought it into skincare formulations now, but like, the lure of this ingredient tiger grass is that when tigers have wounds, scratches, open wounds, they find this particular plant and they roll in it and they rub up on it. So I love to use that as an example of instinctual skincare. Like, there are all of these plants and compounds and things in nature that can help our skin and heal our skin, if only we come at it from a sort of instinctual, intuitive place of supporting the skin's inherent functions rather than overriding them with unnecessary products. So for me, I don't cleanse my face in the morning. I will cleanse at night with Manuka honey. You can also use just regular organic honey. Manuka has like more healing capabilities if your skin is particularly inflamed or experiencing acne or has some sort of surface issue. Manuka is amazing for healing that. Honey is also humectant, so it helps your skin cells draw in water to keep you sort of moisturized and hydrated. It has antioxidant properties, so it's good for helping your skin handle pollution damage. There's so much to love about honey. So I cleanse with honey. And then in the mornings, I will splash my face with water and then apply a little bit of jojoba oil as a moisturizer. Personally, I need that because my sebaceous glands, which produce sebum, which is the skin's inherent moisturizer, were damaged from Accutane. That's sort of how Accutane works. It shrinks your sebaceous glands. So now I really have a hard time producing moisture on my own. So I use jojoba oil instead of my skin's own oil. And it's great because jojoba is biomimetic. So that means it mimics human sebum. It has a lot of the like same fatty acid profiles, a lot of the same compounds. So the skin recognizes it as its own almost. And it really helps it sort of perform the rest of its inherent functions. And then at night, I usually leave my skin completely bare because the skin interacting with the environment is so important. That's how it determines how much moisture it needs to hoard, how much oil it needs to produce, when it needs to shed its cells. The environment, I think, is like an overlooked part of your skin's processes. Like, if it's cut off from that environment, if it's covered in goop, it's not performing all the functions it needs to perform. And then, yeah, in the daytime, I do use a mineral sunscreen.
So that relative to a lot of people's, especially I know we're talking a little bit more about women than men, and this is certainly not a topic that is irrelevant to men because many men participate in a lot of this stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to say in an overly verbose way is that routine is much more minimalistic than a lot of women's routines.
Yeah.
The problem I can see is that I trust you just based on all the work you've done. But what about when the honey, for example, the Monica gets overly manufactured and everything has this opportunity? And again, there's no answer for this. Everything can then be marketed, repackaged to the point where it's just one of those other things in the aisle at the drugstore. And you're like, I have no idea. These are all saying that it's great. How do you keep up with the research? And do you have any advice practically for people to find the right sources?
Yeah, I mean, for Monica in particular, I wrote a really in-depth article on it for fashionista.com a couple years ago, and actually found that 87% of Monica on shelves is counterfeit Monica. So most of it out there is not the real deal. It's been diluted or counterfeited in some way. And these like counterfeit versions find their way into L'Oreal products, and all of these like big box skincare brands now say they have Monica honey in them. If you look at the ingredient list, it just says honey. There's no like specific type of honey that they list, and it's toward the bottom. So there's a very little bit that's used in there for, you know, name recognition because Monica has become this cool thing. And you're right, there are some really interesting ethical arguments that come up there. And I interviewed people from the Maori tribes of New Zealand. New Zealand is the only place where Monica honey is produced by the bees that feed off of the native Monica trees there. And so real Monica honey will only ever come from New Zealand, and the Maori tribes who harvest it are seeing issues because consumers will buy, you know, a Western product that says it has Monica in it, but it also has 50 other ingredients, and they'll use it and it doesn't really do anything. And so then in their mind, it devalues Monica completely. They say, oh, this ingredient doesn't work. And then we see that the indigenous people who are actually harvesting the super powerful, super potent, beautiful natural ingredient that's been used for centuries down their lineage, have a harder time selling this beautiful resource that is actually really powerful. So it's really hard to decide what is an ethical way to go about this. How much do my purchasing decisions as an individual affect this sort of global economy? And yeah, I think it's important to do your research on every single ingredient that you're using and its origins and where it's coming from. I use Monica honey from Flora Health. They work with the indigenous Maori tribes. It is a beautiful product. It is ethically sourced. It's my favorite. And that's also another reason why basically my skincare routine is 2 ingredients. It's honey and it's jojoba oil. And it's because I can really research those sources and make sure that I'm purchasing them in the most ethical way possible. And like, honestly, why not? It doesn't hurt my skin to use fewer ingredients. It actually helps my skin. It helps my bank account, and it helps these companies that are actually doing really good work to get ethically sourced products out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, extremely solid advice from somebody who knows the industry. Jessica, do you have any final thoughts that you want to offer somebody who's listening to this, who it's resonating with a lot of what you're saying, but they're still skeptical and they're probably going to use all their creams tonight?
Yeah.
And I'm not judging them. I'm just saying,
no, I'm not judging them either.
That's the reality. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd say?
Okay, so I have 2 thoughts, one philosophical and one practical.
Perfect. That's the
philosophical. I would say that beauty and products and this notion of self-care as the application of products is often messaged as an empowering thing to do. What has really helped me is realizing that in order to participate in that empowerment, I have to purchase that empowerment. And these empowering things actually siphon my actual sources of power. They take my money, they take my time, they take my effort, they take my headspace, my thoughts. Like, I remember when I was really into skincare, so much of my brain space revolved around my skin, what it looked like, what products I needed to layer, what new thing I needed to buy, what next miracle ingredient would help me. And it was messaged as empowering, and all it did actually was steal my personal power. So start shifting your mindset, start really considering, where does my power actually lie, and are these products giving it to me? And then on a practical level, I would say, if you want to divest from skincare and see how your skin works on its own, it is best to sort of ditch all skincare products for a full 28-day skin cycle. 28 days is how long it takes a skin cell to be produced in the basal layer of your skin and mature, come to the surface of your skin as a dead skin cell, and then flake off. So if you can leave your skin alone for 28 days, I know it's very hard, but in pandemic times, it's actually the easiest time it's ever been to ditch your skincare routine. You will see your skin start to re-regulate and start to do a lot of these things on its own. And you will get a baseline idea of what your skin actually needs. So like maybe your skin needs, like mine does, a daily moisturizer. Maybe it does need some help in the exfoliation department, but you'll never know what it actually needs unless you let it just go wild and see where you land. And you might find you need absolutely nothing.
I love it. Philosophical wisdom and practical advice. Jessica DeFino, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you. Where can people learn more about you, read more of your articles, follow you?
Thank you so much for having me. I loved chatting. The best place to get in touch with me and keep up with my work is my newsletter. It's called The Unpublishable, and it's through Substack. So the URL is jessicadefino.substack.com. I'm also on social media at Jessica DeFino _ for Instagram and Twitter, but I'm actively trying to spend less time on social. So for now, the newsletter is the best avenue.
Great idea. I just, in one of my more recent episodes, I'm not even sure if I published it yet, I was talking about, follow us on Instagram, and I said, I hate social media.
I'm with you.
So I will put all of that in the episode notes. Jessica DeFino, thank you so much. Everybody, check her out, and I will put all of that info in the episode notes. Don't use your beauty products tonight. And have a great day.